So this is me looking at when I decided that Christianity or the Catholic Church's impression of it was not for me. That sounds like a bold statement, doesn't it? You know, there wasn't actually a specific time and date when I decided this is not for me. I know that when I left the convent, when I'd been a nun in a convent in Ireland for some years, and it was there that I had this unease in me. My whole being was quite disrupted, and I wasn't eating, and I wasn't praying, and I wasn't involved in the everyday life of the nunnery as such. Looking back on it now with more self-knowledge and knowledge of the times, that would have been the beginning of the 60s, we were under a very strict rule, you see. We were under what is known as the Ignatian rule, which is the same rule that the Jesuits had. And that meant that we had to keep very strict silence times, very strict meditation times, very strict times when we learned the theology. We had to do years in that to kind of know about God, if you like. And something in the wild Irish Donegal soul in me was not content with getting to know about God. Yes, that was it. You see, when you get to know about somebody, you're relying on information from other people. You're relying on what you're going to read out of books from people who maybe knew this person. You're going to be relying on data coming in from outside, telling you, instructing you, informing you about this person. And when I say this person now, I'm talking about Jesus. I really wanted to get to know him. I think I was, you know, the stage of a young woman when she's in love. Yeah, and she's safe. She feels safe. Well, I was in love with Jesus because I'd read these amazing stories in the gospel. How beautiful he was, how kind he was, how compassionate. I had this romantic idea of this beautiful, tall man with kind of a half dark skin with long black hair and piercing eyes. And that this man was a bit of a vagabond. He didn't have a home. He didn't seem to be married with children. He had a great time, you see. He just went from place to place, and he would give a bit of a talk here and there. I don't think he said a lot. In this way, he reminded me of my father. And so I was attracted to men who didn't say a lot, to kind of that deep knowledge and dark eyes. And this pseudo, if you like, teenage love that I had for Jesus penetrated my whole life. From when I was about, I suppose, 5 or 6, going into the chapel and watching the people going to communion, looking at the stations of the cross, the crucifixes everywhere to remind us that this dear person who was totally without sin had to die for us. So there was this romantic kind of grief in me that, this kind of guilt and grief together, that he had to die for me and was my fault. So in some way, wanting to make up to him for my badness, for my boldness, I wanted to give him something. So I gave him my life. How romantic can that be? Because part of what we had to say as a nun as we prostrated ourselves on the floor of the big chapel, we had to say, I offer you my life. Until death us do part. I mean, it was a marriage, definitely. And we got the ring, you see. So I'm the bride of Christ, and I'm totally in love with my groom. Never met him, heard about him. But as the years went on, you see, I wanted to know more than about him. I wanted to know him, this himself. And I thought, being a nun, I'll get closer. And of course, at the same time, I'm afraid of my life of sexuality, afraid of my life of men, boys, or whatever, due to my background in sexual abuse. And so this was an amazing marriage whereby Jesus stays in heaven and I stay on earth. And we have the nuptials, you see, we have the deep meditation. I'm meditating on my lover, my beloved, if you like. Nothing sexual would even enter my head. It wasn't even the thought that might come. Nothing like that. But when we look back on it, it was this romanticized idea of religion. The whole gospel stories, I translated them into something beautiful for me, and I walked with Jesus Christ, you see. So it was more than getting to know about him, it was really being in there with him in the desert. It was almost like losing myself in the other, in the beloved. And that's a long way to go, I know, of course, to tell you the story of why I left the Catholic Church. But this background is important because I was stuck in there. Jesus was the Catholic Church for me. And going to Mass on a Sunday morning was receiving the beloved into your body. Listen to the language. You receive the beloved into your body, flesh and blood. The transubstantiation at Mass, where this magic happens. And the priest is able to magically transform, through ritual, transform this little bit of leavened bread and wine into the living being of Jesus Christ. I'm almost stuck now for words. That is so grotesque. So grotesque. And to believe that all your life, to really believe that, and every Sunday and every morning as a nun, receiving the beloved into your body. Now, translate that sexually if you like. We're talking about copulation. We're talking about sacred copulation. Though you haven't even a thought of genitals in your mind. It wasn't even that natural. It wasn't even that wholesome. It was a kind of diversion that I felt comfortable with, very comfortable, not a man in sight in the convent. So I had this love for Jesus after I left the convent. Of course I had. There was Mass every Sunday and what have you. But 2 years later I got married, and the whole idea of sexuality was still not what I wanted. It was something foreign to me. It was almost abusive. So I could really only partake in it if I had a glass of wine, because that relaxed the whole being. And I could see that I had to be in an altered state of consciousness in order to have what we call natural intercourse, sexuality. So when I came out of the convent, I had to really look at all that. And not only that, but I had to look at, a Mass every Sunday, yes. The man was taken away now from this total concentration that I'd given to Jesus. A human man now was taken over a bit. And that felt uncomfortable. As a good Catholic, that felt rather uncomfortable. And as an ex-nun, that felt uncomfortable. But I remember when I was married, this must have been in 1970, and I was on the pill. And I went to confession in Donegal town, and I said to the priest that I was on the pill. And almost loudly, certainly I'm sure people could hear him in the church, he said, "Until you give up this demon practice, do not come back to the sacraments. One of the sacraments was communion for me, every morning, every Sunday. And I went out of that church feeling like, literally feeling lost would be the word. I didn't know anymore, you see, what to do, because the priest is in lieu Jesus Christ on earth. He's the substitute Jesus. This is what we're taught. He's ordained. And he's telling me this. It's a demonic practice. Yeah, the word goes very deep. It's a demonic practice. Unless you give it up, do not come back to Holy Communion. You cannot see your love anymore if you continue with this act. So being married, not able to take this choice on my own, I had a partner, I decided there's something not right about this. There's something not right. I was going through hell anyway, married in Northern Ireland to a Protestant. I'm the Catholic, we're living in his parents' house. It's extremely difficult to be there. And I was told I can't go to Mass on Sunday anyway, because we will not have Catholics in this house, number one, who will go to Mass on Sunday morning. So there was a lot of disruption in my love affair with Jesus, if you like. And after a while, I got a good job in the library. This is about 1971, I got pregnant. And while I was in the library, I saw a book on the Sutras of Patanjali. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting, I wonder what that's about. Took it out, book on yoga, and read it through and thought, I can really hear this, because he would talk about things that made sense to me, like the kingdom of heaven is within yourself, and he would translate that into this spacefulness of the divine is in you. And what I did is I went through all the sutras, and as I did, I was having out of the body experiences of this other idea about religion, which is meant to, the original word is meant to realign us with our soul self, with the beloved inside us, with soul consciousness. And when I read that book, I thought, that's it. That I was dancing. I didn't want to read it twice. Once is always enough for me to read a book. It went in. And then I heard that there was yoga training in Belfast. Went to Belfast. My God, difficulty in getting there from 40 miles away with roadblocks, bombs on the way, etc., etc. Anyway, I did that. And I had my 2 years of yoga training. The interesting thing, very interesting thing is, I was late starting the group, but after a while, the teacher came to me and said, Phillida, would you like to teach yoga philosophy? You seem to know an awful lot about the philosophy. I said, well, I haven't learned it. She says, I know you haven't, but you're coming out with things that seem to be very yogic. And I said yes. And so again, I translated the sutras, 182 sutras of Patanjali, into contemporary language for people living in the here and now of their religione, of their alignments into themselves. And I was writing rhymes about this stuff. Writing rhymes about it. And we had big classes, 80 and 90 people. And as I'm teaching people, I'm learning myself about these sutras and what they mean in contemporary living. And so after that, I began to see yoga as a way of life. And then I had to stop teaching yoga, and all that stuff went on in Northern Ireland. But slowly, as I had left my marriage, left Northern Ireland, we're now at 19 in the 90s, and I'm beginning to find a different way of looking at myself and at other people and at religions. And I think it was 1998 when I first went to Findhorn. that the whole Celtic thing opened up. You read this in my book. It opened up to me. And I know that I had immediate access to ancient wisdom, ancient Celtic wisdom, through Bridget's line. And every day there were teachings coming through me. I couldn't live them yet because I didn't know what they meant. I had no idea what they meant. So they stayed until I was able to evolve into receiving them and into living them. And I was told very, very definitely, you have to live this stuff before you teach it. And that I have done as far as I can do possibly. I have experienced, and then it becomes a theory. Usually we have a theory and then you experience a theory, but mine was the other way around. So nowadays, let me get back to the religion. Nowadays, when I think of the Catholic Church, I think about the patriarchy, and I see an institution, and I see a lot of sentimentality around the Jesus story. I see a lot of sentimentality around the Christmas story. I see untruths. I see misrepresentations, miscalculations, mistranslations of the old Aramaic language that Jesus spoke, which was very, very akin to the ancient Irish, which has its stem in the old Aramaic language. Now this is very interesting for me because I can pick up many words in the ancient Gaelic and the old Irish language that would be very much present in the Aramaic language. So from then on, from 1998 on, having worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, having worked with the dying, etc., I realized that I knew why I had come to the earth. I'd come to live the ancient wisdoms myself and then to teach them, to pass them on. But to pass them on in a way that doesn't cling to people, that allows them to be free. Here are the teachings. Live them if you will. Don't bother if you don't want to. I'm neutral. It's okay. But I need to do it for myself. And the Catholic Church, I see, is fading away. It's time for it to fade away. Of course it is. You know, it's been with us since Pauline's time. Since Paul, it's not Christ's church. It's not Christianity. It's Pauline, institutionalized religion. It came from Paul. And Paul, of course, had a very, very, what you would call unnatural and patriarchal view of women. You know, he said they cannot speak in church. They've got to cover their heads. He didn't want to be around women, and he kind of, I just wonder what his relationship was like with his mother. I don't know, but my sense is that Paul didn't have a good relationship with his mother. Neither did Peter, who was one of Jesus' best friends, buddies, fisherman, who left his wife and his very sick mother-in-law and went to join Jesus. And I always have a giggle at this because I'm thinking, well, isn't that great, you know? He left the house of the mother-in-law and his wife. That's not very great. But he went to join the men, you know, the men around Jesus and the fishermen. And he wasn't nagged at, you see, anymore. And it wasn't this great thing, Peter was a great man, he left his wife. I see it in a totally different way. That I see it as, thank God he got out of the house and he's now with his friends, the fishermen. You know, he can eat when he wants, he can sleep when he wants, he's out in the boat all day, he loves fishing, he loves Jesus because he has the crack with him, you see, they have crack together. And Jesus is a great cook, and we hear about him, you know, frying the fish and making the meal for the men when they come in from the boats and all that stuff. But the Catholic way of living is very restrictive. Thou shalt not, especially for women. We're not allowed to be priests, but we are allowed to wash the priest's garments. We are allowed to starch the alb, which is the big cloak that priests wear. We're allowed to put flowers on the altar. We're allowed to clean the altar. We're allowed to clean the church, but we're not allowed to preach. We're not allowed to do the miracle of transubstantiation, the ritual of changing the wafer and blood into Jesus Christ. That's too advanced for women. And you know, of course, up until 1975, I'm not sure in the date, where women who had just produced a baby was not allowed into the church until 6 weeks after the birth, because she was unclean, and then she couldn't still go into the main church. She had to go into the sacristy, the little room beside the church where the priest changes his clothes and gets candles and what have you. And she would kneel down in front of the priest with a white candle and ask forgiveness. It's called the purification ceremony. And then the priest would bless her. Now she's cleansed and she can go to Mass. She can take communion. So when I really absorbed these rules and regulations for women, and the idea that men had to have their times of sexuality, the woman had to do her duty to the man, it was called. You do your duty in connecting with the man. Never mind that he was drunk most of the time or whatever. So women had a very low place within the Catholic Church. The women sat on the left side of the church, the men at the right. The men didn't have to wear hats, but the women had to wear hats, keep bowing all the time. And as a child, I seem to have absorbed all that, but like it was normal, not natural. It was very normal, so I just continued the normalcy of it, but not the naturalness of it. So when I left the Catholic Church, I remember going into the church. I had to do a lot of healing. I did a lot of rage work. I did a lot of grief work. And eventually I could go into the chapel and I could go up to the altar, and I actually went in behind the altar. And I thanked the church for anything that was good that was given to me, and that how I could find myself at the end, and I could release the institution, I could release the commandments, I could release the demandments, I could release the theology, I could release the dogma, I could release the church history. And in the end, I bowed and said, thank you, and I left the church. So I left as a friend that understands and has compassion for another, that's still going through it. And what I have now in my life seems to be it's absolutely right for me. It's absolutely right for me. There is no God in heaven dictating. There is no Jesus Christ to fall in love with, though it was a lovely time. There's no sinfulness. You see, there is no state of grace and state of sin. There is a continuous state of grace. And I know myself, when I'm out of grace, I'm having a reaction to something, but it's not sinful, you see. It's just a psychological reaction. And I'm not going to go to hell for it, and I'm not going to go to heaven for being good. You see, it's going to be up to me how I live this life with integration and with a love for people, because I have a love for myself, and a total and absolute compassion for those still in religion and tied up with dogma. Bless their hearts. They only know about the divine. It's time to live it.